If you're looking for a job right now, applying actively, or interviewing right now, this podcast is for you. My guest today is Laura Burke. She's a recruiting leader with over a decade of experience in recruiting. This episode is jam packed. We talk about how to stand out in your resumes, your cover letters, job applications, interviews, how to negotiate your salary. All this to help you land your dream job. And stick around till the end because there's a bonus section. I'm your host, Neeraj Mithrani, and I've been a hiring manager for almost a decade now, so I'll be sharing my perspective as well. Let's get started.
Thank you. Huge thank you to you for putting this together and for having me on your show.
Thank you for coming on the show. So, you've looked at a lot of resumes. What are the main things that you look for in a resume?
Yeah. The things that I look for personally, a resume should be a simple read. To your point, Niraj, we receive hundreds of resumes for one given job. Some more, some less. There's just an influx of resumes. And so it's very time consuming if we're reading through paragraphs to try to really understand your achievements and what you've done in the past. So, my recommendation is I highly recommend very clear, concise bullets, very meaningful, impactful statements that talk about what you've done, how that made an impact on your company and your team. So, clear titles, how long have you been at the company, clear durations, and then, yeah, listing your achievements at the company that translate to the job that you're applying to. I've seen resumes that are 10 pages. I recommend nothing more than 2 pages because you just get lost in so much information. So I would say, as we grow in our careers and we have a lot of experience, some of that experience 10 years ago may not be relevant anymore. So you can, figure out how you want to how you want to display that experience. You don't have to list all of your responsibilities that you did 10 years ago, right? But if you just have your title, the name of the company, the title, and how long you were there, that helps then tell the story on how you've built your career. So yeah, I would say keep it short, keep it concise, make sure things are very that you're communicating out information that you want the recruiter and the hiring manager to immediately know when they look at your resume. Some things that I have seen also on resumes, and I would advise against it, is if you're at a company that uses acronyms or company jargon that we all don't know, I would encourage you to leave that out because we don't know what that always means. So that's something I've seen and I would recommend being mindful of. The other thing I have seen, and just to communicate how to make your resume more appealing to the job or to recruiters or hiring managers, if your career has taken different paths, say for instance, or have different titles, and you're applying to a job that is different from your past experiences, I would recommend making or including a summary statement or an objective statement that sums up your experience, which translates to the job in which you're applying for. So, again, somebody looking at your resume among hundreds of resumes that are currently to be reviewed, how can you stand out within that first page and really communicate out your experience that's relevant to the job?
Wow, that was so much value in that answer. Thank you. I love that you talked about catering your resume to the job that you're applying to. I also like that you talked about the impact that it's had on the company. I recommend people the STAR format, the
Mhm.
situation, task, action, results. And that might be too much to put in a bullet point. So definitely consider that for the interview. But maybe in the resume, you can include at least the results that were achieved. So, hey, I made this product. This is the customer engagement or retention that it had, or maybe the impact to revenue. Putting that in there, the quantitative helps the qualitative side.
Mhm.
So, I'm going to say one more thing that I really loved in your answer. The acronyms part is so
Mm.
important to make sure you're not focusing or including just jargon or acronyms in your resume. I'm going to talk about engineering just because that's where I'm most familiar. Even if you're applying for an engineering role, you may be tempted to include a lot of jargon in there. And when you're interviewing a whole panel, not only recruiter and hiring manager, you might be interviewing with product management or customer management. So if your resume is only catered to engineers, then you're not really giving people threads or enough context that they can tug on and ask more questions about to get to know you better. So that's why avoiding jargon is such a awesome advice there.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Just curious, how much time do you spend reviewing a resume?
Yeah. For me, it really depends on the resume, to be honest. So if it's a clear match, for example, an engineering manager is applying to an engineering manager role or one level above, then it's an easier read. I can quickly scan, the bullets and the achievements and determine whether or not that person progresses and moves forward. If their career has taken the different career paths, like I was just talking about a couple minutes ago, and a little more nonlinear, then it may take me a little bit longer to read through to really try to pull out the qualifications for the job. So, this is where I would definitely encourage job seekers to make sure that your resume is, again, very clear, very concise. Have that summary at the top. If it's not clearly written that, you may fit that position, just make sure that you're including it up front, that you are qualified for the role.
Awesome. If you're finding this video helpful so far, smash that like button because then the YouTube algorithm will share it with others. You mentioned cover letters are important to you. Tell me more. And what are you looking for in a cover letter as well?
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I will, and I've had conversations with my colleagues and my network about, do they read cover letters? Do they not? And it honestly is mixed. And you probably, if you Google it, do I include a cover letter? It's probably going to be mixed feedback on there as well, because some recruiters do and some don't. I'll be honest, I do read them. And the reason I read them is because that's where I find a personality really shines. Why you're applying, what is drawing you to the position, what is drawing you to the company, and make it personal, make it fun, and yes, talk about your achievements, but I would say quick paragraphs, but also, let your personality shine through, and why it's a great fit. I mean, in past companies, I've read stories where the company has helped people on personal journeys, and to really be a part of that and understand that and see what their motivation is really inspiring. So anyway, all in all, cover letters are helpful, especially, again, going back, if you're applying for a role where maybe your experience is different than what the position is looking for, or maybe you've taken a career sabbatical and you want to talk about that a little bit. Basically, what you want to do in the cover letter is to convince the recruiter or the hiring manager of, like, yes, let's talk, let's have a conversation so that I can really showcase how I'm qualified for this position.
One advice I would give here to the viewers is don't go to ChatGPT for cover letters because the personality that you mentioned, that really needs to shine through, right?
Yeah. And that's so funny you mentioned that, because yes, we are hearing people are writing, or ChatGPT are writing on writing cover letters these days.
Yeah. And I think it could be a starting point. Like, let's say people are completely lost on what's the structure, what's the format. Hopefully, this podcast helped there as well. Some of the amazing resumes and cover letters I've got are those that are so catered to the job and they go a step beyond. And I don't think everyone needs to do this, but especially for gaming industry, I had a couple of candidates who completely changed their resume and cover letter to look like one person had a character sheet. So it's like, what are my strengths? And they had like little bars on it and picture and so forth. And one person had a full format of their resume and cover letter, having colors and themes of their favorite character from the game. So just giving some examples there.
I totally agree to that. I've seen some very creative cover letters, and it's just very inspiring. And yeah.
Awesome. For people listening to this, if they're applying for jobs, should they be applying for as many jobs as possible or just a select few? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. So honestly, it's a personal choice. I know a lot of people who are selective about where they work, because they want to make sure that it is the right fit, it's the right culture, they align with the mission and the values of the company, size of the company, growth opportunities, things like that. Everybody looks for certain things when they're looking for their next career home, and then there are other individuals that these are less important, and it's really about finding a job and something that can support them and their family. And so I would say everybody's desires and motivations are different. So I would encourage people to do what's best for them. So if you are applying to many jobs, um, just be thoughtful about it because sometimes that does translate to recruiters and hiring managers, especially if your resume has an objective statement and you indicate the wrong job. I've seen that before. You know, you're applying for, let's say, an engineering manager position, but your resume says, you're excited about I don't know, the community manager role, right? I would just make sure that you tailor your resume based on the jobs that you're applying for.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think it also depends on what stage of your career you're in. For example, if you're just a fresh graduate, you may want to increase that span, and
Mm,
maybe you're not sure what you're interested in yet either. So it could be, as an engineer, I might be interested in the back end, working on infrastructure, or I could be working on the front end side of things, or I want to work specifically in games. So in that cases, maybe it's more fitting to apply for different roles as you're finding your interest.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, and yeah, it's certainly a personal choice, and everybody is at a different stage in their life and their career and what's important to them.
So when we apply for jobs, should people apply at the level that they're currently at, or should they aim for one level higher? What are your
Mm.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, another good question. Great question, actually. And honestly, I think it ties back to what you just said, Niraj, about individuals being at different places in their life and their career and what they want out of it. So, I've had several conversations with personal friends, colleagues, and even candidates who are at different places in life. And some want the next level up. Some want to make a lateral move where title and compensation is no longer important or a motivating factor. And then there are some individuals that I've talked to that want to take a step back. Maybe they've been, climbing the career ladder. They've been promoted multiple times because they're just amazing and they're awesome, but they want to get back to their craft. Again, I think it really depends on the person and their career. And there's nothing wrong with any of these choices. If you want to, continue to grow your career, or if a lateral move is okay, or even if you want to take a step back so you can focus on other things, nothing is wrong with any of those choices. I would also say that recruiters and hiring managers need to be very cognizant as well of that perception and that perspective, because oftentimes we hear, well, this person is too qualified for this job, but maybe that's a benefit to companies and a team, right? Because they're going to really add a lot of meaningful impact and bring great experience to that role in that company. And right now, we're seeing more and more job seekers and even employees that want a better quality of life. They're looking for that work life balance. And, working 50, 60 hours a week is not appealing to them. And so they want to come in, they want to do a great job, make an impact on to their company and their team, but yet also spend time with friends and family. So I would say, it's really up to each person and what they want to get out of their next step in their career.
You mentioned, hey, some people want to scale down a little bit. So I've seen engineering managers who want to go back to being senior engineers because they
Mhm.
want to focus on the coding side of the lateral moves. I've seen engineers who want to be artists, as an example. Or myself, I went from manager and program management to being an engineering manager. So I love that you brought up those different perspectives that people can take on how they're going about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of the next level, I also try to think about how close that the person feels they are to the next level and what kind of data have they received about it. For example, if they felt, oh, I'm very close to a promotion, or I was about to get a promotion at my current job and I got laid off, as an example, then maybe it's okay to apply to that next level
Mhm.
because you've gotten feedback and validation not only from self-awareness but also from others that, hey, you're very close to that next level. So the interview might be a great avenue to actually test out that hypothesis and get feedback how close I am to this, or maybe I should be at my current level and work at that for a little bit longer, pick up some skills and experience, and then whichever place I end up at, then try to ask for a promotion or a raise at that time.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, Niraj. And I think one of the things that as a job seeker you should also be aware of, because this may not translate externally as it is internally, but titles have a lot to do with the size of the company as well. So, for example, a smaller company, you may be the head of something, the head of recruiting, or the head of people, or the head of engineering. Yet, if you go to a large company, where there's 10,000 or more employees, that title of head of whatever is not going to translate. So it is going to seem like you're taking maybe a step down when it comes to title, but that's not the case because there's a different scope, there's a different impact that different size companies you know uh, look for and align to. So I would say that's something else to think about too when applying for different jobs. If you're a head of something at one company, you may be applying for a senior or just a manager level at another larger company.
That's a really good point that you bring up. And also when people are applying, they can make sure they validate that through the interview experience, but also through job description. Like, what are the actual expectations of this role? And then, do I actually meet those expectations, or hey, do I need to build some skills and experience to get there? Also, if they are applying for a higher title or a higher role, maybe they need to ask themselves, are they ready for that challenge? Because if you haven't been in that role yet, going to that next level is going to bring in some challenges. And this is
Mhm.
something I talk about with my direct reports, is that once you're promoted, your next performance cycle, you might barely meet expectations because it's a new role. There's a lot more to learn. There's a lot of expectations and responsibilities. So just being aware of that, if people are applying for a higher level.
Yeah, that's a great point.
You said there are like hundreds of candidates applying for roles. So how can people set themselves apart?
I would recommend connecting with hiring managers on LinkedIn and recruiters. Now, I will say I can't guarantee that you'll get a response. Hiring managers and recruiters get a flood of LinkedIn emails every single day. So it's really hard to juggle that plus, the applications that we're receiving and everything that's going on internally. So while I can't guarantee a response, you never know. It could really capture somebody's attention if you reach out to them through LinkedIn. So I would say leverage your network. Does somebody know somebody that can put you in touch with the hiring manager or the recruiter? There's the whole cliche, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. And some of that is true, but also it's really about leveraging your network and tapping into that and getting those referrals. I would also say if you have an interview, and this used to be so common back in the day and a part of an interview etiquette, but we don't see it much anymore. And that's a thank you email. It's very rare to get a thank you email these days from candidates. And so, again, it's not a requirement, but I definitely will say when I've received a thank you email from a candidate, whether it's for me or whether it's for the interviewing team, I've seen, I've had to forward thank you emails to the interviewing team. That really does stand out because it shows that the person is reflecting on the interviews, grateful for the time spent, and have the ability to reemphasize their interest in the position. So I would say that was another way that you can really set yourself apart from other candidates.
Interesting to hear that not many people do that these days.
Mm-mm.
You mentioned it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. I want to go into that a little bit more in detail, which is that the people who know you can actually genuinely vouch for you. So it's not just you're asking people for a job or something like that. Like, these are people who have actually worked with you, they know you, and if they're really close to you, they might even tell you actually maybe apply for this job instead of that job.
Mm-hmm.
With layoffs, the silver lining was I saw this outpour of love in the community when people posted on LinkedIn that, hey, this is the kind of job I'm looking for. Can you please let me know if someone has heard about something? People reposted that, and that widens that network, so to speak. And there are people who are vouching for you who are reposting it. And there could be different kinds of love they show. It could be like a like, a comment, a repost. All of that now shows up on the other person's network and opens you up to different possibilities there as well. So that was a really cool way that you put it about who you know is important as well.
I think that's a really good point too that you made, Niraj, about like the outpouring of support during this season of layoffs. And I hope that this becomes the new normal, right? And people feel comfortable supporting one another through these times. And I've seen employer lists and companies that are hiring and websites being created and Slack channels and workspaces being created to share these job openings with one another. And so I hope that it's the new normal going forward because yeah, everybody can use it and it's so beneficial and the support has been very encouraging.
Yeah. And I think it also takes courage on asking for help. So if you have asked for help, I just want to acknowledge that and the courage that you brought to the table for asking for that, especially posting on LinkedIn can be a little bit overwhelming. Like, what are other people going to think about me? But when you take that courage, all you'll see is outpour of love. At least that's what I've seen in my network.
Mhm.
And that's really great to see.
Same, yeah.
We talked about reaching out to hiring managers and recruiting as well. What does that reach out message look like? Do you mind sharing like an example of what proper etiquette would look like in that? I'm sure people don't want to spam, and hiring managers and recruiters don't want to get spammed as well. So, what would be a valuable way of approaching that and good etiquette there?
I think again, short and sweet, right? Reaching out to the individual, the recruiter, the hiring manager, the person that posted, if they are the recruiter or the hiring manager, commenting. But short and sweet, like it's nice to meet you. I saw that this job is available. I'm very interested. Here is why. Here's what I bring to the table. I would love the opportunity to connect. I should also mention go ahead and apply for the job directly because the majority of companies use an ATS, which is an applicant tracking system. So that is the internal software that your application goes to. And so that really helps with the workflow, making sure that nobody falls through the cracks and has all of your information in one space. So I would say apply for the job, definitely, but then also reach out to the recruiter and just keep it short and sweet. And, one message is enough. You definitely want to straddle the line of showing an interest but also not constant follow-up.
That's really good advice. Applying for the job as well, as obvious as that may sound, a lot of people forget to do that. Like they'll
Hmm.
just reach out to the hiring manager or the recruiter,
Totally.
and that actually puts additional workload on their hiring manager or recruiter to now get their resume, put it in the system, and so forth, and do some manual tracking, even or manual workflow steps. Versus if it was in that tracking system, it can just move from step to step as the steps progress, like resume review, interviews, so forth. So thank you for mentioning that. I know that would save me a lot of trouble as a hiring manager.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are multiple places that people can apply to. There's probably the careers section on the website. There's LinkedIn, maybe Indeed or Hired. By the way, this podcast is not sponsored. I'm just sharing some names that I know. Should people apply for the same role in multiple places, or is that spam, or would the tracking system automatically detect it and remove the duplicates? How does that work?
Yeah. Okay, so we're talking about systems and operations, which I love. Um, so I would say, and this is based on my experience, I'm not sure how all job boards work. However, most of these job boards will route to the applicant tracking system. Most of the time, it's going to recognize that you're a duplicate applicant. So you will show up twice. Sometimes it will automatically merge you as well if it recognizes like the same name, same email, all of that. Applicant tracking systems will recognize that and merge. So I would say go ahead and apply for it, all of them, just to be on the safe side because I don't know if all job boards are connected to the ATS. Maybe there's a company that's so small that they don't have an applicant tracking system yet, right? So they are funneling applications through Indeed or LinkedIn, for example. So I would say better safe than sorry. Just go ahead and apply through all of the above, however, wherever you see the job posting.
That's good to know that it doesn't come across as spam if someone is applying in multiple places. I didn't even think about a smaller company not having a tracking system. So that's a really good point you brought up there. Thank you.
Yeah, and also usually applicant tracking systems are going to note the source in which the application is coming from. especially for data purposes and want to find out where our applicants are coming from. So we would see if you're coming from LinkedIn or you're coming from Indeed or the company's website. So it will note that on the application as well.
Great. If someone has applied already to the career site and LinkedIn, when would be a good time to follow up? Because we want to be mindful of not spamming. If they haven't
That's
heard back,
if
sorry.
they haven't, that's okay. I was just about to ask that in at what stage. So if they haven't heard back, that's a really good win. And I think we've all have experienced a time where we apply for a job and we don't hear anything, or we interview and we don't hear anything, unfortunately. So if you apply for a job and you don't hear anything after, let's say a week, then maybe you want to reach out to the recruiter or the hiring manager. Maybe you want to do it at the same time when you apply, right? And get your name, put your name on somebody's radar.
So that's good advice. I'm going to repeat it back to make sure I got it. If you've applied for a job and haven't heard back, a good practice is to follow up in 1 or 2 weeks and maybe just stop there. Is
Yes,
that
yeah,
fair? Okay.
that is fair, unless you're applying and reaching out to the recruiter at the same time. So kind of what we just talked about a few minutes ago. If you apply for a job and then you find the recruiter online and you reach out, I would say that that's enough too.
Cool. Any tips for preparing for interviews? I want the inside scoop.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think there's almost two different answers, depending if you're interviewing virtually versus on site, which pre-pandemic everybody interviewed on site, right? So now we're seeing shift on virtual interviews. So anyway, I would say so. I'll talk a little bit about both, but for both of them, first and foremost, research the company. I have talked to candidates where they're like, so what exactly do you guys do? And it's like, oh no, oh no. So please research the company, research the people that you're talking to. If now you're progressing to the hiring manager and individuals on the team, look them up on LinkedIn. See what it is that they do, where do they come from, right? So you already walk into the company knowing, at least, or walking into the interview at least knowing who you're talking to. As a recruiter, I do this for my candidates, but if this doesn't happen, I would encourage you to ask the recruiter, how can I prepare for my next interview if they don't proactively give it to you, so that you know what the person is going to focus on, so that you can start to prepare your answers for that and think of really relatable experiences and examples that you can talk to. Have a list of questions prepared. I can't tell you the number of times where, during my phone interviews with a candidates, I'll ask, do you have any questions for me? And they say, no, I don't think so. And it's like, please have questions. You can think of anything. What's your experience like working at X company, or what are the challenges of the role? Whatever the case may be, there's a ton of questions you could ask. So prepare questions. I always say this: candidates are interviewing companies just as much as companies are interviewing candidates. So make it a two-way street. So that's kind of like interviewing in general. But if you're invited to interview on site, make sure you know the address, the parking situation. How do you check in? Make sure that you have all of those directions so that you're not rushed or you get lost or feeling flustered or anything like that. Going into an interview, of course, show up on time. This is virtually or on site. Make sure you're on time. And if you're running behind because of something, give the recruiter a heads up so that we can make sure everybody is aware of it. If you're interviewing virtually, make sure your technology is working. You test the speakers, the headset, your background, making sure things are tidy. We've seen some very interesting things, and it's like, oh, okay, you're laying on your bed while you're interviewing. Okay, we're still going to do this. And that
Wait,
is a
are you
true
serious?
story.
Oh my
Yes.
God.
Yes, that is a true story. People can be very comfortable at home.
So I liked how you talked about asking the recruiter, how can I prepare for my next interview? The fact that someone can ask you that shows that it's not just this test for the person who's interviewing. You're also trying to give them relevant context about the interview so they can think about relevant experiences that they can share during the interview. So that's a really great question. And thank you for doing that for your candidates. I know you did that for me and I really appreciated it.
Yeah, Yeah. I mean, I've been on the other side of the table too and have interviewed. And even though I do this for a living, it's pretty anxiety inducing, to be on the other side of the table and interview. And so, I always put myself in the shoes of my candidates and what can I do to help them succeed and, feel comfortable and confident going into interviews. And so, yeah, whatever I can do to help with that, that's what I want to do. And that's what I'm here for.
So we talked about interviewing and questions that people can ask the interviewer. I actually have a whole video on that on my channel. So if you're completely lost, Laura gave some great examples. Check out that video. I'll link it in the show notes as well of questions that you can ask your interviewer because, like Laura mentioned, you're trying to figure out if the company is a good fit for you. So checking if any red flags come up when you're interviewing them is also valuable data.
Yeah.
I'm going to share one other tip in terms of interviewing is ask clarifying questions instead of just jumping in and giving your answer because
Yes.
it may be that they're actually looking for something else and you're going off on a whole different tangent. So asking clarifying questions helps. How can people set themselves apart in the interview process?
I think this kind of goes back to, things we've already talked about. Definitely doing your research, making sure that you know the audience and who you're going to be talking to. When a candidate is well prepared for an interview, it absolutely shows. They ask very thoughtful questions, they know the background, they know the role. There's the thank you notes. And I would say there is a healthy balance too with following up with the recruiter. There's so many internal things that are happening behind the scenes and so many candidates that we're juggling all at once. And so I would say, sometimes maybe we don't have feedback yet from an interviewer and we're waiting on that and we forgot to follow up with them. So a friendly nudge to the recruiter after it's been, let's say, a week, expressing interest, continued interest in the role and seeing if there's an update. I would say that also helps just keeping you at the forefront of everybody's mind.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'm going to share from the hiring manager perspective what are some
Mm.
things that set people apart for me. And I think showing the passion really helps. Again, there's a line there as well, but you're talking about your skills and experience, but showing why you're interested in the role as well. For example, if I have two candidates who have the exact same qualifications, but one is really passionate about the company or the product, I would probably choose the person who's more passionate because their why, as Simon Sinek would put it, really aligns, the values align there.
Yeah, that's really good, Niraj. And it actually made me remember a time when I was hiring for a graphic designer position. So I was
Mhm.
interviewing a candidate. And after my call with them, a couple days later, they went to the company, they researched the number one, the product, and then they sent a GIF of the product as if they were actually doing the job already, and it was branded properly. The tone was correct, and the images were correct, which they had just downloaded off of Google and the website. So that really showed initiative. We didn't ask this person to do it, but it just showed their passion and their interest. And they went over and beyond and said, like, here is my actual graphic design work if I were to do it for your company. So again, that passion that you speak of, Niraj, and it definitely came through.
Awesome. One thing that usually comes up is reference checks. So, do y'all actually ask questions about the past, or is it just, hey, did this person work at that workplace?
Yeah, and probably everybody does reference checks differently. And let's be honest, like nobody's going to give a reference when they're not going to, if they don't have anything favorable to say. So we can already expect that the reference check is going to be really positive. So the key is to pull out information that is going to be helpful to the company or to that person's future manager. So, what has been their experience working with others, or what are some opportunities of growth for this person, right? And so that's something that maybe a former manager can speak to so that they can pass that information along to their new manager. So it's really about tailoring the questions to get what you want to know out of that individual. And honestly, not every recruiter does a reference check. And then there's automated reference checks. So it really just depends.
All right, we have to talk about salary. Do I need to answer how much I make right now or in my past job or share any of my salary history?
This has been implemented for many years now, but companies cannot ask you what you make, or what your salary history is. That is illegal in most states now. Then most recently, a new law was passed for pay transparency, and so you'll start to see companies that hire in certain states, and so that's California, Washington, New York, Colorado. These states now start to list their pay range within the job description. So that's pay transparency, and that's to help bridge the gap between gender gap, pay differences, to really make sure people are being paid fairly and equitably. So if a recruiter asks you how much do you make or what your pay salary has been, I would avoid answering that. And you can ask the recruiter, what is your salary range for this position? Or what do you have budgeted for this position? I do also want to take a moment to talk about this because I have seen a lot of social media lately giving advice, and to be honest, like poor advice about negotiating salaries with recruiters.
That was going to be my next question, actually.
Yeah, and you'll see like, oh, just because, they say it's, this is the range, they can really give you more. That's not the case. There are pay ranges that are already benchmarked for, the size of the company, the industry, the role, the level of the role. And so recruiters are only able to operate within a certain range. And so then even within that range, you're now looking at your level of experience, internal equity. And so, what are other people at your level and your amount of experience? What are they getting paid, right? Because we want to make sure that's fair and equitable when we bring you in. There's location differences, right? And so, somebody that lives in Oklahoma is not necessarily going to be paid the same that they're living when they're living in California. So there's all these other factors when recruiters are figuring out what to pay. So I always like to ask my candidates in the very first call, what are salary expectations? Where is it that the person wants to be or needs to be if they were to accept a new position? And I know it's a very uncomfortable question and answer, right? Because it's very personal and it's very vulnerable. But the reason we do it at that stage is just so we don't waste your time and go through the entire process and then find out that we're, way off. So I would be prepared to talk about it. It is going to put you in a state of vulnerability, but just have a dialogue with the recruiter. The recruiter wants to pay you A, what you're worth, and B, pay you so that when we present you an offer, you say, yes, I am sold. I am going to accept that, right? And we don't lowball. And so I would say just be open and transparent and make it realistic. I've received answers that are like, I'm looking for anywhere between 100 and 160,000. And it's like, that is a $60,000 spread.
Yeah.
Like, where, what is that big gap and what is that difference, right?
Hmm.
And so do your homework,
Yep.
like practical research. There are certain sites on the internet that you go to, and they're not always going to be accurate because they don't have that data. They're just pulling information and trying to provide what they think is reasonable. But, ask your mentor, ask people in your network, if you truly don't know what a position should be paying or what, you should be receiving, ask people that are in the role or have been in the role in the past. So ask trusted advisors what you should be requesting from companies.
You mentioned the range. Is that just the base compensation, the salary itself, or does that include equity that you may be getting or
Mm.
a signing bonus or something like that?
So the only thing that is required is the actual base salary.
Hmm.
And then each company really post whatever else they feel comfortable with. So they could say plus benefits, plus 401k, or they could be more, share more. It just really depends on the company. But legally, they only have to share the base range.
Cool. So let's say someone goes through the interview process. What about if they were rejected that, hey, they weren't the best fit for this role? How long should they wait to reapply?
The companies that I have worked for and that I've recruited for didn't have a waiting period. I know some companies may, so I can't speak to every company, but I would say keep an eye on the website. Companies continue to evolve, positions are posted. So I wouldn't say that there's any sort of waiting period, but just be mindful of And I've seen both sides of where, people are very thoughtful about reapplying to another job that is very similar to the one that they've applied for in the past. And then I've seen other applicants where they will literally apply for every job posted. So, not recommending that, but there isn't a waiting period for any company that I am aware of.
Is it okay to ask for feedback if I applied for a position and I got rejected? Is it okay if I ask for feedback on why I wasn't a great fit for this role?
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely are able to ask for feedback. Just being honest, I can't guarantee that we can provide too much information. And really, most of the time, it comes down to somebody just being stronger, and having more relevant experience for the role. So there isn't really constructive feedback that we can provide. If there is feedback, let's say, for instance, somebody needs to have a different language, right? Like maybe they need to know Python. They're in basic Python, but they really need to be intermediate or advanced. Then that's feedback we can give and say, take courses or start working in Python more, and then come back to us in 6 months, when 6 months or a year, when you feel more ready and prepared. So if there's something tangible like that, absolutely we will be able to provide that.
All right, before we close, what is one last piece of advice that you'd like to impart for anyone either looking for jobs or actively interviewing right now?
Look, interviewing is stressful. It's very stressful. You don't know what interviewers are going to ask. You don't know what they're looking for. So I would say it's normal to feel that way. Know that your recruiter is wants to see you succeed. Your recruiter wants to help you any way they can. So, build that relationship with your recruiter, build that, and be honest and be vulnerable. It's okay to say, look, I'm nervous. Or if an interviewer asks you a question and you don't have that experience, or you need a few minutes to think about it, say that. Interviewers would definitely recommend you saying that versus trying to make up something on the fly. Know that everybody has been in your shoes before, and it's not easy. So, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to ask clarifying questions like Niraj mentioned earlier. I know it's easier said than done, but this is a really tough market right now. And I know people have been looking for jobs for months. And so don't give up, continue to apply, reach out to your network, leverage your former colleagues, or professors, or school, or whatever it is, and connect with people to really help get you to that next level. So remain encouraged, and I guarantee you something great is going to open up.
It may sound like I'm just praising Laura, but I truly mean it that you're one of the best recruiting people that I've ever met. And the amount of care that you put into the candidate experience and the empathy, the kindness, and just truly believing and helping other people succeed, that's what you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bonus section. With the layoffs that have happened recently, I'm sure people may be asking if I was part of these mass tech layoffs, do I have to be worried about looking for jobs? Basically, does it look bad on me?
The short answer is no. It's really up to you as a job seeker, how you want to communicate this. But I do think it's important that you let, recruiters or hiring managers know. Also, find ways to translate it through your resume and LinkedIn profile. And to be honest, right now, most people already are aware of the climate when it comes to the job market. It's not going to be a surprise for them to know that, you were impacted. And honestly, it doesn't look bad on you. It was all out of your control, and there was nothing you could have done to prevent it.
It's really great to hear the perspective from the recruiting side. And as a hiring manager, I would say the same thing. The person is being honest, they're putting it upfront about what exactly happened. So I don't really think candidates have anything to really worry about that, hey, they were affected by the layoffs.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and dropping these amazing words of wisdom throughout. I think this is going to be super helpful for the viewers and listeners. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you again for having me, and thank you for watching.